Good morning, everyone. My name is Jack Smoot, and I'm here doing Morningsong in the Davidson Hall at the John C. Campbell Folk School. And I'm guessing that there are a bunch of folks out there experiencing my Morningsong for the first time, and some who haven't even been here. So welcome to all of you, and I love having a new audience for all my old jokes, so I'm glad you're here. Morningsong is something that happens every day during a regular week at the folk school and on the weekend classes too. I believe it has some Danish heritage to it, and it starts at 7:45, ends at 8:15 with breakfast, and I normally do a Monday morning song, which is traditionally a history of the folk school. So that's what I'm going to be doing today, even though it's Friday. I teach dulcimer building at the folk school. I've been doing that since the late 90s, and I teach how to build, not how to play. This is a mountain dulcimer here. This is what I'm talking about. And I was introduced to the folk school way back in 1991 when I'd met my bride, Sally, and she had already been coming to the folk school for quite a while. And she told me about this wonderful place that I needed to check out, and she actually gifted me a class at the folk school. And I came in December of '91, and I took a class with Herger Knight, who was the resident dulcimer builder at the time. And he taught me how to build this dulcimer. This is the very dulcimer that I built in his class in 1991. So the dulcimer has had quite an impact on my life. I got started building dulcimers because I wanted to build one for my daughter and get her interested in music. And then the two of us started going to festivals, and we found a local club. This was in southeast Missouri. And this beautiful blonde showed up, a friend of a friend who had learned about the dulcimer at the John C. Campbell Folk School, and she wanted to hear more dulcimer music. And I'll be darned if that isn't how we met and fell in love and eventually moved here. We moved here about 12 years ago. So as I said, the dulcimer's had quite an impact on my life, and I'd like to play a tune that hopefully is appropriate for this morning, and maybe you'll recognize it. Well, there you have it. And I missed the crowd, the roar of the crowd, but hey, thank you. Well, there you go. As I said, I do teach dulcimer construction here at the Folk School, and I also teach a class. It's a long weekend class building a really fancy wash tub base called a Tubbatone. So keep your eye out in the catalog for that coming up. I think I'm scheduled to teach in December of 2021. So a little far out there, but it never hurts to plan ahead. And I'm sure my wife is shocked to hear me say that. Oh, by the way, I should mention that song is Morning Has Broken. I learned it from Cat Stevens when I was an old Peace, Love, Crunchy Granola hippie type, but that it's actually an old hymn, and so that song goes way back. I want to talk a little bit about some folks that were really committed people, and I'm sure that you've all heard about the difference between involved and committed. It's a little bit like breakfast. It's a little bit like bacon and eggs. The chicken is involved with the egg, but the hog is committed to the bacon. And the people that I want to talk to you about are a couple of folks that were incredibly committed, and that is John C. Campbell and his wife Olive Dame Campbell. And just an interesting side note is that there is no written record that John C. Campbell ever set foot in Brasstown, but we'll get to that more later. John Campbell was born in Indiana in 1867, and he was educated at Williams College and Andover Seminary. And he was a man of faith, and he felt his privileged upbringing required him to give something back. And so when he graduated, he decided that he wanted to go out and find folks that he could help with his knowledge and his skills and his energy. And in 1895, his first job was as the principal of a school in Joppa, Alabama. And he continued in education for the next 6 years, teaching at schools in Alabama and Tennessee. He moved into higher education and worked at Piedmont College in Demorest, Georgia, and he soon became the president of that school. Now, John C. Campbell was a little bit of an A-type personality. He was a very hard worker. He took everything very serious. He wanted to do a good job, and he was always struggling to raise the funds that it took to keep this school operating. And while he was there working as president of Piedmont, he lost his first child, a son, and shortly after, his first wife passed away. And he continued to work hard and eventually became gravely ill, just basically wore himself out. And so he was ordered to bed rest by his doctors, and eventually an ocean voyage was suggested to help him gain his health back. And I checked the formulary for my insurance, and all they have on there are medications. There are no ocean voyages, so I think we really need to take a look at healthcare. At any rate, in 1906, John set sail for Glasgow in Scotland to visit the land of his father's people. And unbeknownst to John, there was a vivacious young woman named Olive Dame on board with her sister Daisy and her mother, and she was celebrating having graduated from Tufts College. She was also an educator, and she also had that same feeling of wanting to give back, that she was called to serve. And she and John met on the ship, and they traveled throughout Scotland together. And by the time they were ready to head home, they were engaged. And after getting married in Massachusetts in 1907, they headed back to Demorest, Georgia. John soon resigned his position, and they decided to travel throughout Appalachia and to study the region and its people. Their efforts were funded by a grant that John had received from the Russell Sage Foundation. And they used that money to gear up and head out. And their goal was to find out what they could about the mountain people, and more importantly, what their needs were. And throughout all of this activity, Olive kept journals. She extensively journaled all of their travels and their activities. And they stopped at every county seat, every academy, every school they could find, and they hoped to write a factual survey of the people and what their needs were. And one of the important things about John and Olive both is they knew how to relate to these folks. They knew how to ask the right questions. They knew how to make them feel at ease so that they felt comfortable telling telling them about their lives and what it was that they needed. Southern Appalachia was also one of the richest areas for old-time music and narrative ballads, that folk songs that were coming from England and Ireland and Scotland. And so Olive, during their travels, was constantly collecting songs coming from these areas, and she would not only write them down, the lyrics, the words, but when she had access to a piano, she would work out the music for them, which that was huge. No one else would, it was common to find the lyrics to these songs, but to actually have the music written out, that was very important. Their survey of the area was completed in 1909. And one of the many products of their efforts was a wall-sized map that actually defined the boundaries of Appalachia. And if I'm not mistaken, that map is in the archives here at the John C. Campbell Folk School. I have to apologize. There are a couple of other people that do the history of the folk school, and I've seen them both do that. Bob Dulcimer and David Leyden, and they both have different takes. I think they've both done a lot of research on the history of the folk school. But a lot of the information that I have, I've taken from the DVD called I Sing Behind the Plow, and it's about the history of the folk school. And as you may have noticed, I'm kind of reading from my notes here, and there's an old story about two couples that were walking down the street, and the guys were up in front and the women were behind them, and at one point, the one guy said to the other, he said, "Hey," he said, "we went to a new restaurant the other night, and you really got to try it. The food was fabulous. The prices were reasonable. The service was excellent, and you've got to go." And so his friend says, "Well, great." He says, "What's the name of the place? We'll look it up." And he says, "Oh, I knew you were going to ask me that." He says, "Darn, let me think about it for a minute." And he thinks and thinks, and finally he says, "Oh, I know." He says, What's that flower that everybody's always wanting to raise in their garden? And usually they're red, but sometimes they're white or yellow, and they have thorns." And his friend says, "Rose?" And he goes, "Yeah, that's right." And he turns around and says, "Rose, what was the name of that restaurant we went the other night?" Well, that's kind of where the crowd's still roaring. That's kind of where my memory is. So that's what the apology is about. You'll just have to bear with me as I read my notes here instead of trying to remember them. At any rate, by 1912, John and Olive had settled in Asheville, North Carolina. And John actually established an office there, and it became the southern office of the Russell Sage Foundation. That was the organization that had funded his efforts. And by April of that year, tragedy struck and they lost their first child. And I just can't begin to imagine what that would be like. But they were heartbroken, and they dealt with it by doubling down on their efforts to help the people that they had been studying. Education was the most common answer when asked about needs in the mountains. And John felt that one of the biggest defects in rural education at that time was the concentration of attention on the individual and not the community. And he had become very interested in the ideals of the Danish folk school. And he was primarily interested in the work of the Danish theologian Nikolai Frederick Severin Grundtvig. And Grundtvig proposed schools for adults, and this is very important. They were schools for adults without grades, no credits were given, and there was no competition, non-competitive learning. And the first folk school was started in Denmark back in 1844. And this is one of my favorite quotes from Olive. She said, according to her, these schools were designed to awaken, enliven, and enlighten the adults who took classes there. And I just think that's a wonderful quote. John and Olive bought passage to Scandinavia to study the schools there. Unfortunately, they were scheduled to travel in August of 1914. And that was about the time that some serious kerfuffles had arisen in Europe. And so Olive spent her time during World War I working on her collection of ballads and folk music. And she actually contacted Cecil Sharp, who was considered the foremost authority on English folk balladry. And in 1917, they co-published the book English Folk Songs of the Southern Appalachians. And it became a definitive collection of American folk songs. John and Olive lost their second child in October of 1917. And soon after returning to Asheville, John was diagnosed with heart disease, but he just refused to stop working. That type A personality was too strong. And in May of 1919, while running to catch a train, John collapsed and eventually died at the age of 52. Olive once again turned to work as a way of dealing with her grief. She moved to a small beach house that she and John had built on Nantucket and gathered all their notes and the first chapter for the book that they were wanting to write. And John had already completed the first chapter, and she brought all this together and worked on it and finished the book, The Southern Highlander and His Homeland by John C. Campbell. She credited him as the author. And this became another important book as a resource for people who wanted to learn about the people in Appalachia. In 1922, Olive and her sister Daisy, remember Daisy was on the ship when she met John, and a young school teacher named Marguerite Butler traveled to Denmark to survey Scandinavian folk schools. They spent quite a bit of time there, and one of the most important takeaways of the trip was the importance of students and teachers working and eating and living together. And shared meals were critical. And when everyone's able to come back to the folk school and enjoy classes here, gathering around the dining hall table is one of the treats. You meet new people, you hear exciting stories, you learn what other people are doing in their classes, and it's definitely an important part of the folk school experience. Upon their return from this survey trip, Olive started working on a book about their experiences, and Marguerite began the search for a location to build an American folk school. She came to Murphy in 1925 with plans to make discreet search for land. Well, in a small town, news about just about anything gets around pretty quickly. And the morning after her arrival, she was visited by a storekeeper from Brasstown named Fred O. Scroggs and his father. On November 16th, 1925, a community meeting was held at a local church where Olive and Marguerite announced their plans to build a folk school in Brasstown. And don't forget, back then, Brasstown was just a tiny little town. Fred Ho had talked his parents into donating 75 acres of land, and the community donated many, many hours of labor and materials, and what they built became the John C. Campbell Folk School. And pledge cards were actually printed up for that meeting, and many of those pledge cards are still in the collections here at the Folk School, and I believe some of them are on display in the History Center. So again, when the campus opens up and you have the opportunity to come and visit, or better yet, take a class, that should definitely be a stop during your week, the History Center. I was going to mention earlier about the magic of this place and how it can grab a hold of you. I know that when I came the first time in 1991 in December, I was just really taken with the historical nature of the campus, the beauty of the surrounding area. It's nestled in a gorgeous valley here in the mountains in western North Carolina, and all of the wonderful things that were happening outside of class. There's always interesting things to go and do and experience while you're here. And normally, when I'm giving this on a Monday morning, I suggest that students who are here for the first time come into the Keith House, which is one of the very first buildings that was built here, and there's a big community room there where dances are held, and just sit in that room for a little bit and feel the aura, feel the vibrations of that room. Being an instrument builder, I know that wooden instruments with use over the years, violins, guitars, ukuleles, the vibration in the wood mellows it and makes it a sweeter sounding instrument. And there's something about all of the vibrations that have occurred in the Keith House. It's where the Friday afternoon show and tell is held, and the Friday evening concerts, and there are dances there, and I've even been to a couple of weddings there. And if you just sit quietly in that room, you can feel that energy from that place, and it's palpable. I had a gentleman take my class early when I began teaching here, and he built a dulcimer. He came from Wisconsin, and when he went home, he was telling his daughter about this place. And of course, you know, a parent trying to tell your daughter, you know, oh, you got to do this. Well, she was not real enthusiastic at first, but then she started learning a little bit more about the place, and finally decided to come and take a class. And she actually took a class with me to build a dulcimer, and that was my first experience of having a second generation student in one of my classes. But she told me that when she came to the school and she walked into the Keith House, she had this overwhelming feeling of having come home. And it was so strong that she went back and sold her house and moved here. And Lynn Ann is now actually one of our assistant studio artists, and a good friend and a very talented woman who has taken many classes and learned how to do all kinds of neat things, all because of that strong feeling that she experienced walking into the Keith House. Well, I want to close with another tune here. I think we're getting fairly close to being ready to go to breakfast. And I want to give a shout out to a few folks. Happy birthday to a good friend of ours from Missouri, Brenda, who probably won't take a class at the folk school, but she certainly loves experiencing these virtual morning songs. She's been watching them fairly regularly. Also want to give a little shout out. I lost my brother earlier this year, and I want to dedicate this song to him. And then finally, a fellow by the name of Alan Androkaitis was teaching ukulele building here last June. I took the class with him, and he actually taught me how to build this tenor ukulele. And so I thought it would be appropriate for me to finish with a tune on the ukulele here. Kudos to Alan. Thank you. All right, let's see if I can actually do this. Happy trail to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling until then. Who cares about the clouds when we're together? To sing a song and bring the sunny weather. Happy trails to you till we meet again. Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling until then. Who cares about memories of the folk school? Keep us yearning to be in Brasstown, singing, dancing, and learning. Happy trails to you till we meet again. Till we meet again. I think I hear the dinner bell. It's time to go to breakfast. Thank you all so much for joining me this morning. We're a little short, but better to be wanting more than to wishing he'd stopped sooner. Bye-bye.